Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining the first of Elevate's sustainability webinars. For those of you who I've not met before, my name's Elaine Alcock. I'm one of the founders and directors at Elevate. We're a business development consultancy focused on innovation, sustainability and community. Set up in the middle of the pandemic for reasons that seemed a little bit more sensible at the time, and have now been a long time of doing stuff online, getting back into doing things in person as well, which is lovely. But what we wanted to make sure is that as we kind of transition back into the real world, we don't lose some of the benefits that we had of doing online events like this, which is partly, as I introduced the panellists, you'll see they are not all local to Elevate, so it means that we've got a much broader panel than we might have done otherwise. Also, it makes it more accessible and means that we can obviously record this session and share it out for people who aren't here. So we will be doing a sustainability focused one every month. The one coming up in March is going to be around green coding, green servers, looking at how your digital footprint links up to your carbon footprint. But the first one is all around sustainable fashion. And it's something that I've had conversations around for some time, having conversations around what does sustainable fashion actually mean? Is it just environment? Is it also people that we need to look at? I'm sure you'll have seen headlines, even going back kind of pre-pandemic around the headline that was, the Zara dress that's been to more countries than you have, and every bit of it had been flown around the world. Lots of kind of different information coming through. And then obviously during the pandemic, we saw that real increase in online shopping. We had companies like Boohoo, Pretty Little Thing, selling off kind of clothes that we would wear to go out in and couldn't at very, very, very low prices, switching to different models. And obviously also uncovered during the pandemic some of the issues in working conditions within the UK, as well as in global supply chains for some of the fast fashion industry. So there is a lot to go at there. I'm delighted that we have a really great range of panellists. I'm going to ask them all to give us like a little brief overview of what they're all about in a moment, but just kind of give you that quick overview. We have Dr. Patsy Perry, who is the academic expert here, focused on sustainable fashion, based at Manchester Met and Manchester Fashion Institute, something that she's been involved in for a long time. I've worked with Patsy Perry a couple of times before on podcasts, and she actually came to our carbon literacy training last week, which was wonderful getting to see her in person. We then also have Dale Hicks, who many of you will know from the Fashion Network. And what I'm delighted with Dale joining us is he has that overview of what's going on in the market, lots of different conversations with lots of different brands, and be able to give us some real insight into how those trends are shaping what's going on across the whole sector. And then I was introduced to Alison at the end of last year, based up in Edinburgh. So again, delighted she's been able to join us this morning. And I'm not going to give away the story of Floco because Alison will do it more justice than I will. But such a fantastic example of a kind of accidental company that has become sustainable fashion and really gives an insight into some of those crossover of different issues that play out in that kind of fashion clothing space. So if I come to you first, Patsy, can you do a slightly better introduction than I've just done there in terms of what you're involved in?
Morning, everyone. Delighted to be here. Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Patsy Perry. I'm an academic at Manchester Fashion Institute, which is a fashion school, which is part of Manchester Metropolitan University. So we're one of the largest fashion schools in the UK, and we cover fashion design, fashion business and fashion communications. And the university as a whole has actually been ranked as the #1 most sustainable university in the UK, according to the People and Planet University League, which is really exciting. So a lot about what we do, both in the Fashion Institute and the university more broadly, is very much geared around sustainability. It's just part of what we do. Personally, I've been involved in teaching and researching around sustainable fashion, supply chain management and corporate social responsibility for over 10 years now. So I'm delighted to share some of my expertise and also hear from the other panellists and hear about challenges and questions and discussion points that you all might have this morning.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And as you say, it's become so close to the top of the agenda recently, but obviously there's been this huge amount of work going on, and that reputation that Manchester Met Uni has across the city, but also kind of nationally as being a leader in sustainability is wonderful, and it's something that we're really, I think, proud of as a region, as well as kind of the people actually involved in the university. And I know things like the carbon literacy training that we mentioned before is rolled out across kind of staff and students, and that's, you know, every sector, every discipline has that option of understanding more about that impact. And I think it's going to be really exciting to see where these latest graduates of these courses end up going and taking that knowledge. I think it's a real win for the region to have that kind of level of upskilling and passion there. So coming over to you then, Dale, can you let us know a little bit about the Fashion Network and what your organisation's all about?
Sure thing. So my name's Dale Hicks. I'm one of the co-founders and directors of the Fashion Network. We are a professional business-to-business networking organisation focused on fashion retail professionals across the globe. So we have about 250,000 followers and members, all from sort of fashion and also fast-moving other fast-moving consumable good businesses. And we tend to focus on, obviously, putting together networking initiatives, but from a content point of view, we focus on delivering professional development content for people working in our sector, be that as publishing content that will help people do their jobs better, or that running events, webinars, conferences, again, helping people to become better at what they do, and also helping people to add value to the businesses that they either run or work for or aspire to work for. And obviously in recent months, the whole sustainability topic, well, I say recent years, but it has been accelerated very much by the pandemic, has become, you know, very much in the front of minds of basically a lot of businesses that we work with, which I'm sure we'll discuss a little bit more as we carry on.
Absolutely. And I think actually when we say months, we'll kind of like, we feel like we've lost 2 years, don't we? When people say to me last year, I'm like, oh, 2019, like that's not last year anymore. It does feel like we've had such massive change in such a short space of time. And one of the things that we'll kind of pick up on a little bit later is this kind of weird period as we're coming out of things, of being like, well, are we going back to normal, or are we actually going into something quite different that we've not seen before? And I think sustainable fashion and the industry in general around kind of e-commerce as well, is we're coming out into a very different world to the one we left at the start of 2020. So then I want to come on to you, Alison, and I'm going to ask you to just do a slightly longer intro of your company, because I don't feel like this is something that we can condense into your kind of general 30 to 60 second introduction. Can you take me back to where this very first started? So we'll come on to what Floco currently does shortly, but what actually got you involved in this project?
Sure. Morning, everyone. So I was studying economics at university, and through that had to do a dissertation. I was, at that time and still am, fascinated in how we teach, what works for different methods of communication, and also fascinated especially how we teach sexual health, because it's a really difficult topic to teach and to teach well. That took me out to an organization in rural Kenya who I was working with, and I was looking at what are all the different levers you have when you're trying to safely teach children about where your risks are in sexual health. And in that, I found out from girls in my classroom, the reason that they had a very high teenage pregnancy rate and a very high HIV rate in the area we were in was the girls couldn't afford period products. And when they asked older girls in their classrooms and in their schools how they coped with their periods, the girls would say to them, there are men in the village, and if you spend the night with these men and you do as they ask, they'll give you period products in the morning. And from a research perspective, that was an entirely different angle we hadn't expected. But from a human perspective of being a young woman stood in that room and realizing the risks they were putting themselves through, I was terrified for them and amazed at the risks they would take to stay in education. And so that then became my mission of how do you help? What levers are available to us? Is it a donation kind of problem? Is it a market one? Where do you get products from? What products work? How do we ensure girls can stay in school all month and can stay there safely?
Unbelievable, as you say. It's just that absolute terror is trying to imagine myself back as being that kind of, young teenage girl that you just take for granted, that you're able to go to school, that, those products are available to you, and not having that incredible risk that the girls are taking. And I think what was really important to me in listening to your story and what kind of got you there is, we quite often think about fashion as being frivolous, and we talk about, clothes, and it's, what we want to wear on a night out, and am I seen on social media in the same thing a couple of times, and they're very real issues, particularly for a lot of younger girls and boys in the UK at the moment, is having that kind of that peer pressure, and it's not wanting to downplay those very real concerns, but just an absolute world apart from actually these types of products and what's going on in Africa. So what then led to kind of having that moment, standing in the classrooms and talking to these girls and understanding where that problem came from, to create this kind of business model that you have now?
A lot of conversations. A lot of it was talking to them and working out what did they need, what kind of products would work well for them, and realizing that reusable pads was an option for that community. It was something that was going to work well, and is a much more affordable option over a longer term. And so we went from there to looking at, was donations the best way, and quickly realizing it wasn't a specific area and it wasn't a specific school problem. It was every school across that region, but it was also the vast majority of the women, because the minute we took across products, it was the teachers and the mums who next needed them. And so we needed something that could scale to actually fulfill the problem. And along that journey, we were doing all the prototyping ourselves. We were trying to reduce cost of manufacture while knowing there is a flaw in fashion. When you start looking at how do you produce a product cheaply, you suddenly realize there's a whole lot more levers than I was potentially aware of when I started it. And initially when I started, everyone would go, well, you can make them in Bangladesh or make them in China. They were countries. And what I wasn't realizing is, a lot of the time they're saying you can make them where health and safety is less of an issue, and you can choose how much health and safety you think is important. And that's terrifying to me. And it's terrifying thinking, well, we're trying to solve a problem in one area, we're trying to support in one area. The last thing I want to know is that we've actually exacerbated a problem elsewhere. But then how do you make a product that's actually affordable to the community that you're selling into? And so along that journey, we realized that most people here really hate their period products, here for me being in the UK, and we don't talk about it enough. We don't discuss it. And because of that, we're not actually tackling the problems. And what we'd managed to do was create a product that fit this market slightly differently for different reasons. And so then we've now grown the company that we sell a product in the UK. We try our best to use the most sustainable we're able to use materials that are available to us. And then that product subsidizes our work internationally so that we can sell those products at cost, get them out to the people who need them. And as an overall, try and make sure everyone can have the best period they can.
What an incredible journey that's been. I shy away from using the word journey in conversations like this, because it sounds like a cliche and it's someone who's been, like on a dancing competition. But actually, I think in this scenario, it is that complete change from what you thought you were going out to study to kind of, a number of years later being in this position of being like, actually, we've now got a product that we're selling to the UK market and meeting a very, very different need elsewhere. And whilst in some ways that feels incredibly specific and quite niche, I think a lot of the issues that you've encountered there are things that are going on across the entire fashion supply chain around those issues you mentioned there, the sustainable materials, the access to markets, but also this idea that you can kind of choose how much health and safety and how secure you want that supply chain to be for everybody working in it. So I'm just going to come to you next, Patsy, for that kind of that overview that I think sometimes when we talk about sustainable fashion, I think particularly off the back of things like COP26 that are being incredibly kind of carbon focused, is looking at, well, what do we mean by sustainable fashion? How broad a term is that, and what are some of those different levers that we need to think about?
Well, it's a really interesting question, because there isn't any sort of given definition, is there? It can mean a lot of things, and brands and designers and retailers will apply it in different ways, but really it should be about anything that's not causing unnecessary harm to people or planet. So that covers all of your environmental pollution, the resources that we use in the sort of production processes, the carbon footprint, but also the people in the supply chains. And fashion is, you know, very labour intensive. So I think there's, you know, millions of people, especially at the bottom of the supply chain, that are actually making garments, and they're some of the world's poorest workers. And I think all of the focus on kind of the environment, carbon, climate crisis and so on, and rightly so, but sometimes we tend to forget about the people who are totally reliant on these global supply chains that we've created for their livelihoods, and they don't often have any alternatives, really, not any viable alternatives. So it's really about making sure that we kind of take them in the journey with us as well.
Absolutely, and I think what I found really interesting studying things like carbon literacy is actually, whilst we have this kind of people planet bit, it's actually like the planet bit has a massive impact on people as well. And the really kind of sad irony, if you like, is when we're looking after the environment, actually we're still not anywhere near there. You know, there's a lot of people who are suffering the impacts of climate change. You know, we've caught the tail end of some pretty terrible storms in the UK recently, and that's just like a tiny drop in the ocean compared to like what's been suffered elsewhere in the world. And actually a lot of the countries where we're having these products produced that are already in not great conditions and don't have the same infrastructure are also the ones that are being more impacted by climate change. So actually that kind of circle there of being like, we're not looking after supply chain number one as people, but also the impacts of climate change that we're talking about, they're also feeling those impacts worse. So it is very much this, we need to be looking at both things and see it as one kind of holistic problem, rather than we can just focus on this piece and that will be okay. Obviously the amount of water involved there in the industry as well. One of the kind of most shocking facts I heard a few years ago was that the fashion industry every year uses the equivalent of the Mediterranean Sea in fresh water twice every single year, which is just this unbelievable amount of water. And again, as we look towards, you know, climate change and the intensity of those processes, that water scarcity is going to become more of an issue as well. So coming to you next, Dale, obviously we've spoken there around kind of some of those real issues. How are you seeing that play out across the sector when you're talking to different brands and people within those organisations? Is this something that's becoming more and more prevalent in those conversations? Are there particular areas that people seem to be much more concerned about?
100%. I mean, obviously through our events program, the professional development program we put on, we're getting more and more demand now for anything to do with sustainability. However, I wanted to pick up a point that Patsy raised. You raised at our workshop, actually. It's just the definition of what sustainability is could be that or that. And there's a lot of greenwashing going on. It's just, you know, people just playing lip service to you know, they might be focusing on just a small element of the sustainable story, if you like. It might just be fabrics, or might just be dyes, or it could be the working conditions. So I think really at the moment we need to try and figure out what that is. I don't know where that comes from, because I think from a consumer point of view, we're seeing a change. We're also seeing a change a little bit from staffing point of view, and I say this anecdotally without mentioning anyone particularly, but we're seeing a lot of younger people now who are choosing certain brands to work for and not work for based on their sustainable record. But for me, I think the primary issue is just defining exactly what we mean by sustainability. Is it about working conditions, about resources that we're using? Obviously, there's that documentary out. Is it the Caspian Sea? I forget which it is now, Patsy, that are saying that intensive cotton farming is reducing the size of the sea, and you know, and all that sort of stuff. The
Aral Sea.
Aral Sea, that's it.
Yeah.
Sorry, big pardon. It's not the Caspian Sea. It's over that way somewhere. But it's really confusing, really, and even for us, obviously we're constantly focused on this topic and we're publishing content around it. It's just, you know, what is it are we talking about? And I think until we can sort of really nail down what the key issues are, you know, it's difficult to sort of say, yes, that's a really credible sustainable brand, that's a really credible sustainable brand. You know, it's a tricky situation. Obviously from a work point of view as well, from the workers point of view, I mean, that's a double-edged sword as well. I know obviously we source a lot of products from various parts of the world, such as Bangladesh, Pakistan, India. Obviously China was a big place, and it's obviously moves around the world. But a good friend of mine from Bangladesh, and his mother's an employment lawyer there, and it's like, you know, they cry out for this work. You know, there's a whole issue about underage workers, but a lot of time they weren't working, they weren't bringing wages in. So what we perceive here in the West is, oh, you know, that's not good practice. It's actually completely perceived differently in these parts of the world. So I think there's also, that's worth mentioning as well.
Absolutely. And it comes back to that, there's just never a simple answer, is there? That sometimes we're like, oh, we could move this and be like, right, we'll do all the production over in the UK and we'll absorb that higher cost and potentially consumers are happy to pay. But then are you just leaving a void somewhere else where there has been employment and now there isn't? You know, how do you work in those markets to actually create something that's right for those countries, and being able to kind of raise the conditions there rather than just kind of move it wholesale somewhere else? And obviously even doing that doesn't take away this travel issue that we're actually creating things very far away from the point of view. So there's always just multiple layers as you start kind of getting underneath.
Well, that's another factor we talk about. You just mentioned the travel there again. That's another issue. You know, it's like, you know, should we be making stuff here to cut down on the mileage and stuff like that? It's just so many different facets to this conversation. We could be here all day really trying to narrow down what is most,
and I think, you know, what really
impactful.
got me, and again, it was that Zara dress headline, and not picking Zara out as any one of the better and worse purely because it was that headline, and I'm sure it's replicated across multiple brands. It's not just this is where it's produced and then it arrives in a store where you want to purchase the product. It's actually how many times pieces of that are moved around. So stitching might be done somewhere else as opposed to, you know, actually creating the full product, dyeing, patterns, all those sorts of things happening in different places that I don't think when you go and, you know, pick something off the shelf or you know, you click buy online, that you think about that amount of travel that's happened first. You maybe think about that last mile delivery, you maybe think about how it's physically getting to you, but you kind of forget how much has happened to that item before that point. Alison, when you've then gone out as a very small supplier and looking to find the more sustainable ways of doing things, and in that broader term sustainable as well, looking at, you know, the kind of the materials, but also the way that they're produced, presumably you have basically no leverage over that. Like, you're not in a position of power in that supply chain. How difficult has it been for you to be able to unpick some of this mess, like this isn't your world, to understand what those issues are and to be able to make those choices?
Oh, it's insanely hard work. And it is remembering all the different nuances. And I think that's also sometimes difficult from a consumer point of view, because they have one particular issue they're really interested in, and they're telling you like, well, I want it to do this, and like, you're not performing on this level for me. And you're like, that's because there are 17 levels, and that's the compromise point. And so trying to constantly play that game of like, what are all of the balls that you're holding, and where are you willing to compromise, and how do you explain to people, well, this is the decision that got made, and this is because of what ever happened. And so we try to find what are the credentials that we're able to do. So like SEDEX are an organization that do massive audits, generally on manufacturers. And so we're able to say, do you have that? Can we see some of the paperwork? And then I have faith that I trust that you're an organization that I would be okay with saying, yeah, that's such and such, that's the manufacturer. And so that from that point of view, we've always tried to play the, is there ways to get documentation? But that's really hard. And you do then have to go, there's not many manufacturers that will work with small brands, especially when we're also a physically small product. So our value of manufacturing that product is very low. So you don't get too many things to play with. You get a couple of brands you want to work with, and then you have to pick and choose who you're willing to go with and what you're willing to play with. And so it's constantly been a learning curve, and it's constantly been like, oh, now we know that we might actually have to change to something over here because we're not okay with whatever's just happened or what we've just learned. And so it has been in one way fascinating, and in some way there are so many things you end up kind of going, okay, what is the focus? Are we going to say the first thing we want to know is that the factory is safe? Therefore, how are we going to work that out? And then we'll look at material sustainability, and then we'll look at waste. And I'm not sure if we should look at all at once across our line, or if we should do it bit by bit, but I've done it theme by theme, because at least you can dive into one area, learn what you need to go, and then go, okay, I think these are some of the decisions that we should be looking at.
Absolutely, and I think that sounds like a very sensible way of doing it, not least because we can't hold 17 or 18 different priorities in our heads at the same time. That as you've kind of gone through that learning, you're kind of unpicking the next layer and the next layer. But one of the things I wanted to pick up on there was you said about your customers asking these questions, and I'm presuming because of your product and your company story and what you do, you have a very highly engaged, educated customer compared to the average person who's going out and buying products. How educated are they? The questions that they're asking, the topics that they know about, has that been kind of quite mind-blowing as to what they know about? And are you seeing a bit of a range of approaches?
Definitely a range, and definitely interesting to know what people know, but also realizing that they have a very different viewpoint. And so for a lot of people, they'll say to us like, oh, you're using polyester, because plastics as a thing, we're on such a global campaign to get rid of. As a performance brand, we're making a performance product. Actually, polyester is, in terms of its technical ability, the best we can use, but also in terms of its eco-credentials. If you're making it in certain ways, it's better than some of the much greener fabrics that are portrayed as green. And so it's very difficult when someone comes in and goes, oh, but I've heard that bamboo is the only way forward and we all have to use bamboo, not to be like, well, actually, here's the miles of paperwork that's being produced by all these different professors on where bamboo can have problems and why we might be using this. And so I constantly have to play the like, let me not word vomit information at you. Let's choose the levels of what is useful to you, what is not going to terrify you of never buying anything ever again, because we're just one of those brands that's telling you you're doing everything wrong. And so knowing what is useful, understanding that, yeah, the population generally have plastics, and people are often much more buzzwords than they are waste and transportation. And so what are you explaining to people? What makes sense? What are you just throwing at them because you don't want to have to unpick the story and explain some of the horrible decisions behind the scenes, and how you layer that? Has also been fascinating then from a consumer point of view. When I look at other brands, I'm like, I see now why you say it like that, because it makes more sense. Yeah. And so it's been lovely to see how much people are engaged, but it's also been that double-edged sword of what do you know and how do we explain how our choices fit into your information?
Yeah, it's so important there that you kind of touched on. It's not just the issues, but it's about how do we have the conversation with the consumer in a way that makes sense. And coming over to you, Dale, about that kind of changing consumer trends, presumably for most of the brands that you work with, actually that comms piece around what you're doing is kind of as important as actually what you're doing. How difficult is it for brands to be able to really articulate what they're doing around sustainability? We've obviously spoken that like there is no definition of sustainability to start with, but then once you start unpicking it, are we seeing quite a range in changing consumer behaviour and levels of knowledge?
Well, I wanted to ask Alison a quick question actually, because
jump straight in.
Well, because when she was talking, obviously my background, well, I was a designer originally, but my background is marketing. So I was thinking when she was talking about polyester, and I wanted to ask, do you ever do any sort of educational work within your marketing, explaining why polyester isn't, is beneficial stuff? Do you use that to your, sorry, go on.
We try. It's often been harder to communicate than anything else. And so now if you go on the website, we declare our materials, and then it's like, here's a blog that explains, but the blog to me is still surface level. And I'm like, we can drill so much deeper. And same with like you post something on social media, sometimes the response is more like you're doing what? And like, oh, let's learn more. So we've really struggled with learning how do you market nicely and in a way that makes sense and invites people to a conversation, but doesn't add extra strain either on the team here or the customer looking at it and being like. So if you have any advice,
well, maybe we can pick this up afterwards then, because I'd be happy, because I mean, we funny enough, we showcase a lot of brands. We tend to showcase a lot of smaller brands that aren't obviously the big brands everyone sort of knows about. We're constantly looking for new stories of brands doing different things, especially within the sustainable space. But going back to your question again, what you're talking about, the changing consumer trends. It's an interesting one, because I obviously see the industry from a B2B perspective, but we're seeing a lot more independent brands like Alison's popping up with various different sustainable credentials. We're seeing quite a lot of bigger brands now adapting. I've been to the trade shows recently, and I see Superdrive popped up in one of the sustainable sections of one of the trade shows. So obviously consumer demand is obviously demanding that, otherwise they wouldn't be doing that. But a lot of what we see is predominantly the change coming from the independent sector mainly, but it's a case of how are brands again communicating this to the consumer, because I think it's a bit of a two-way thing, because there's a lot of, I don't want to use the word misinformation, but there's a lot of confusion.
There's that greenwashing element in some places that is very, very deliberate. Like, we're telling you stuff in a particular way to make you think our product's better.
Yeah.
And then I think there's some companies that are doing absolutely amazing things, but don't necessarily have the language and the knowledge of how to do that. And I see people kind of fall on both sides where I'm like, I know you're doing amazing things, but like, that's not obvious anywhere. And then other people are like, I've got some real questions about what you're doing here, but everything looks great and shiny on the surface.
Yeah, and just one last thing to say on that, actually, you explained that better than how I explained it. But the consumer behaviour thing, it's something we have a joke internally. It's like there's always this intention to buy sustainably, but then the reality is, and I'm not accusing any of my team of doing this, but we've had meetings here internally. We've been talking about certain brands and certain products and price points and stuff like that, and then at the end of the conversation, oh, have you seen this? On Instagram, oh, it's only 12 quid. It's like, we just spent half an hour talking about writing a story, and I think the consumer intentions is well-meaning, but actually sometimes the reality of it's the same with the food industry, and I'm guilty of this. I like to source food from sustainable. Sometimes if you're busy and that's only £3.99, so there's a huge element of that we're finding, and it's difficult to try and, we put a lot of polls out to try and find this, but it's difficult because even the polls, people say yes, I buy sustainably, but you can't say do you buy sustainably, but on occasions don't buy sustainably. So it's a really difficult one to gauge. But the only thing I could say is, obviously from a business perspective, we're seeing a lot more activity within the independent brand space, and we're now seeing a lot of the big guys reacting to it. A lot of the bigger companies, and Patsy might be able to add to this, but a lot of the bigger companies now have sustainable officers, or people focused on sustainable supply chain sourcing, all that sort of stuff. And obviously there's the whole story of Boohoo in the press. They've had to completely rejig the whole supply chain in response to consumer demand, and obviously the hoorah in the press as well.
Fantastic. And I think you're absolutely right. I think Patsy is the person to hop in here around that kind of consumer behaviour, but exactly what you're saying there, that once we kind of have what people say they're going to do and what they actually do. And I think that, as you say, it's true in food, it's true in travel. I was looking at visiting a friend in Denmark, and I was like, fine, like, I got a ferry there as a kid, there must still be a ferry there. That ferry route doesn't exist anymore. So I'm like, fine, well, I could get a ferry from like here to Holland, and then we'd go up through Germany and drive up, and it'll take me like 2 days to get there and cost me hundreds of pounds. Or I can fly and it'll take me 3 hours and cost me £24 return. It's very difficult to then start making these decisions in a way that makes sense. And I think we have to acknowledge there's first of all, there's a level of privilege there in being able to buy the more expensive things, the more sustainable options, but not shying away from the fact that actually for a lot of us that is a choice that we can make, but there is an enormous amount of marketing pressure on us there to keep putting those products in front of us and being like, buy this, it's only this much, free delivery, it'll be with you next day. Like, we're bombarded with those messaging. So it'd be really interesting to hear from you, Patsy, about how the industry's managing those very kind of competing priorities.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult because, as you say, we are bombarded with these marketing messages, and often what a company's doing in its sustainability space and what it's speaking about on that section of the website, it's not really aligned with the marketing messages, the advertising, the social media stuff that you get. And it's really difficult as a consumer, isn't it? We're all busy. We have jobs, we have families, we have lives to live. We've got finite headspace to then kind of go through this kind of complex decision-making processing and trade-offs around social, environmental, sustainability, and so on. And really, you know, what we all need to do is just keep wearing what we've already got and keep things in use for longer. But, you know, we're constantly presented with the shiny new thing, and it's really appealing, isn't it? It cheers us up and so on. But I think it's right what Dale says, there's so many like smaller brands now that are kind of starting up with this ethos as a mission. And the whole business model is around some aspects of sustainability. And I think with social media and Instagram, you can build what looks to be a really big business just online, can't you? Very effectively. And I think it's making the bigger brands kind of stand up and think, right, okay, we need to respond. And so, you know, the bigger companies now are kind of building capacity in their sustainability teams, which is great for graduates, for career routes and so on. A lot of our students are interested in moving into those kind of roles, but I think today they're just so varied, aren't they? It's not just like one sustainability officer, but you might have people working on materials science around materials innovations, or you know, manufacturing process innovations to make it more environmentally friendly. You might have people working with, you know, home workers in developing countries, that kind of social aspects of sustainability. You've also got jobs around sustainability comms. So, you know, the team that you need to build and the career routes are, you know, extremely diverse and varied. So I think there's lots of great opportunities, and I think, yeah, we just need to see the bigger brands really doing more kind of comprehensive work rather than just having a capsule collection. But it's hard, you know, because they've got to re-engineer everything. Whereas if you're a small brand and you start up with that in mind, you know, you're starting out from that point, aren't you? You're not trying to kind of back engineer it into your business model as a large retailer would have to.
Yeah, some really important points there. I think what's interesting there, and I know it's something you brought up when we did the workshop a couple of weeks ago, that actually I think in the UK we think buying new clothes is very, very normal, but that's not the case globally. I think I want to say you had a stat about how rare it is. I'm going to put you on the spot and check that you do.
Yeah, I had a really interesting visit because the university is part of Textiles 2030, which is like a big industry initiative to make UK textiles and fashion more sustainable. So as part of that, we got the opportunity to visit a textile reuse and recycling facility in Manchester recently, and it was really busted quite a few myths for me. So in the UK, we don't really wear our clothing out, so a lot of stuff that charity shops can't sell is actually good enough for people to wear. So that all gets collected, plus stuff from local authority banks that people donate stuff into, and there are companies that will go to immense effort to then sort those into various different categories and then export them to countries. So we actually do have a very strong business where we've been exporting to, you know, countries in Africa for 10 20 years, and there's huge market demand there because most people in the world can't afford to buy new clothing. So, you know, something like 70% of everyone in the world would buy some form of second hand. And I think, you know, yeah, we do see those stories about, you know, clothes, you know, on beaches in Ghana and so on. But there is also a very kind of, you know, effective business model around collecting unwanted clothing, sorting it, and all these things are kind of sorted by hand up to 3 times. So they know that when they're exporting those bales, every single thing in that bale is wearable, clean and usable. And then there is the value in that to then have another life for it, even if people in the UK don't want to wear it because it's not quite fashionable. You know, there's still plenty of people around the world that kind of need those clothing and there's a value in those. But it's quite interesting, isn't it, when you see, you know, what you pay for something in a shop and then what these exporters would then pay for it when it's in a bale, even though it's still new with the tags on it. It's only worth 25p. It was like 50 quid on a hanger in a store, wasn't it? So that idea of value, isn't it? And still all that work that somebody's spent in making that item, making the fabric and then sewing it and so on, and it ends up being kind of almost worthless, isn't it? So
yeah, really interesting. And yeah, like 70% like not buying new clothes, it's just, that's not the world that we see here, and it's certainly not the world that's presented to us online. There's obviously huge portions of people within the UK and within any kind of, you know, rich Western economy that are also not buying regularly new clothes, but this image that's presented to us is you're constantly buying new, buying different things, buying this idea of changing trends and fashions and everything that goes along with it. But what's been really interesting for me to see over the last few years is this idea of kind of normalising secondhand, reusable, that kind of secondhand market in a way that is seen as much more high-end than we have before. So, you know, Selfridges having kind of the secondhand charity elements in there, having these vintage side of things. I'm just going to kind of come to you on this, Alison, because I think it plays into your product would perhaps not have been viable even a few years ago. That we look at, we're very used to disposable, we're very used to that convenience, that actually in the UK we're seeing that move towards actually, I want to be able to reuse things. I don't want to be creating that amount of waste. And actually, it's also more cost effective over a period of time to be able to do that.
That to me is some of like the fascinating ways in the market is how much more accepting people are. And I do, how do I reduce my waste? What does that actually look like? And am I willing to do it? And it is, I love how you put it, that like, we have to acknowledge we have a privilege of making this decision. We also have to be aware a lot of people are in a position they can do it. And they have to be, how do you hold people accountable? What are your levels of it? And I was like, that's such an interesting way to think about it, because often people say, well, reusable is an awful lot more expensive up front. Like, it is, but it's not 5 years down the line. Like by the end of year one, you should be broken even. And that mentality is slowly shifting, but it's definitely like, oh, what on earth? How do I work through this? But we're seeing it's like 70% of our customer base, the main reason they swapped was environmental. And that is anything from chemical use and fears in chemical products to the levels of plastic and disposable, to levels of waste that they're aware they're producing, and thinking, okay, we are to be able to get an environmental benefit.
Really, really interesting. And it comes back, doesn't it, to those kind of overlaps and where the drivers are, that we might come to it for one reason, but actually it then has knock-on benefits somewhere else. Dale, what are we kind of saying? So some of those brands that you're working with, obviously they have a very vested interest in us all buying new every time. Are there brands that you work with that are starting to embrace this a bit more in terms of actually like there being that second-hand market, the rental market, having pieces where we're not necessarily owning them, that we're using them for particular occasions? Or are the brands very much kind of pushing back against this and being like, we need to kind of double down and make sure people are still buying new?
Well, there is been a boom in reselling sites. I think definitely there's the stigma of reselling is kind of changed. It's become almost trendy now. You've got thrifting is a term that's, you know, just I've adopted into my vocabulary over the last couple of years. So you're seeing a lot of, there's a couple of businesses I've seen recently actually that well, there's one in London, a really interesting conversation with one in London that resells. They're called We Are Sot, and they do have a marketplace to resell luxury items. Obviously, I'm not sure how it works further down the value chain you go. So you're seeing a lot of businesses operating this, and off the back of that, you're also seeing some bigger brands now offering, you know, the opportunity for consumers to send their stuff back to them to resell and stuff like that. So you are seeing it creep in now. What impact that does on the whole sustainable thing, I don't know. It's just a marketing thing. Yeah, sorry to sound like a bit of a cynic, but you know, but it is encouraging. But what is encouraging is how the consumer attitude has completely changed to reselling. And like years ago, if you secondhand, such a stigma around secondhand clothing. You know, you're either from a poor family or you was. You know, when I went to art college, that's what a lot of art students did. You know, you get called a hippie or whatever. You know, but now things have completely changed, and I think that's really interesting. And again, a lot of the driver of this is coming from the independent market, and then the bigger brands and bigger retailers now are starting to look. Oh, what are these guys doing? But we've seen some really interesting businesses, but mainly retail businesses. There's another one called Rotara as well. They do a reselling platform for people wanting to sell and exchange stuff like that. So yeah, but I think again it's coming from the independent sector, and the big boys are having to react to it, which I suppose is the same in any sector, isn't it, really?
Yeah, they can drive that change.
Yeah.
We do have Nicola Glebe on the call, who I might put on the spot when we get to the Q&A section later. So just giving you a little heads up there, Nicola, because she runs a business very much on this model. So depending on how happy she's been put on the spot, I'll either ask her to speak or just drop a little bit of information into the chat for us later, because it's some fascinating business models there. But what we've kind of spoken about so far is that drive of consumer behaviour, looking at what brands want to do, potentially people setting up with a kind of particular mission statement inside. Brilliant. Nicola's happy to speak for us in a bit. Do we need more legislation though? It's kind of, we've got this kind of upward movement of people asking for different things, starting to ask those questions and look for it. Is that enough to get us to where we need to be, or do we actually also need that top down of going like, well, actually, you have to work within these parameters. This is what we mean by sustainable fashion. And actually, like, if you're not within these parameters, you're not going to be able to sell within the UK. I'm going to leave that open to the three of you. I'll let any one of you jump in there.
I think we do, because it's the only way really to level the playing field, and we're seeing that there is actually more stringent legislation in other parts of Northern Europe than what there is in the UK. So, for example, I think Denmark have recently announced that you won't be able to use the term sustainable unless you've done a life cycle assessment of the product. So you have to have that evidence to say that it's sustainable, to try and get rid of all this greenwashing, which is, you know, no good for the consumer or anybody really. And I think another country I've read about recently, you're not allowed to use the term vegan leather, because that's misleading as well, isn't it? It's not leather, it's not biodegradable, it has its own issues. So I think some of the terminology that's using, we're going to see more kind of strictness around that. And you know, it's really sort of almost like advertising standards, isn't it, in terms of the language that you use to promote some of these products to people, and make sure that you're being honest, truthful, and not misleading them. But I think it's the only way really, isn't it?
Yeah, and really important there that that's not even necessarily about like, this is what you can do and what you can't do, but it's about like, if you're going to do something, we're going to police how you report on that and how you communicate. Because yeah, absolutely, like vegan leather, it can be brilliant, it can be plant-based, it can be sustainable, it can be biodegradable, or it's literally plastic, and there's no way of knowing from the label actually which one of those things it is. You have to kind of go back and do that kind of research yourself on it. Dale, for you, are you seeing like that kind of, actually it's legislation that we need? Is there a fear from brands that legislation might be coming and they need to prepare for it?
Well, it's three things, isn't it? It's consumer, it's the industry, and it's government, isn't it? It's got to be a mixture of the three. I don't know how you implement a lot of legislation, because obviously we're in a global industry here. At the very least, we need to have some international standards to say, you know, this is sustainable fabric, this is an acceptable sustainable manufacturing process. I'd like to see at the very least some official guidelines that maybe, I don't know was my answer, short answer to that. I'm not 100% sure. You know, obviously sometimes when it all gets a bit messy and you start putting too much legislation in, but definitely I think we need some internationally agreed on guidelines to what we mean by a sustainably sourced product or practice.
Absolutely, it's bringing that clarity in. And Alison, I can see you nodding along there as we go. I'm presuming having that kind of clarity and guidelines would have made your world much, much easier to be able to work out what was the right thing to do.
Definitely. The clarity around what is sustainable and what are we counting, what are we with that discounting is really useful. And that is from both a brand and a consumer perspective. The other part of me is like, there's already, in our space, some amount of regulation, it might change. And so regulation is always one more thing a brand has to think about and go, is this compliant? What does compliant mean? Does it mean that it needs to go to a regulatory body and be stamped? Or is it just that I submit to say that we are? What does that all look like, and how much more effort is that? But at the same time, I'm like, it does make me now quite happy when I see our advertising industry. Sorry, am I any better?
Yeah, that's better. You just went crackly. If you could just repeat your last sentence, that would be amazing. Thank you.
It does make me happy now that our advertising standards agency are stepping in a little bit more to go, especially with a lot of the food brands, what you're saying, sustainable, and how you're criticizing other brands actually isn't fair play anymore. Because I think it is easy sometimes for the smaller brands to go, we are, yeah, like Dale, a bit of both, but I think more clarity around what words mean and what they mean for the consumer would be useful.
Fantastic, thank you. So Dale is actually preempting my next question here with interesting sustainable creds there is, so actually, like we've looked at a lot of the challenges here. So just before I kind of open up to Q&A, the question that I'd like from you is, who are the brands that are actually doing really well here? Like if we're actually saying, do you know what, this brand, this organisation, like they've got it, they're doing well, whether that's in supply chains, materials, the way they communicate with customers, who are the brands that you look at and are like, yeah, that's what we need to be aiming for? Dale, I'm going to start with you since you've already dropped a couple in the chat there.
Well, follow my link is the first one I'd say. Or actually follow us on LinkedIn as well, because we do a lot of showcasing around this space. But it was interesting to me, I did the trade show for the first time in years, obviously with the pandemic and that. But one of the trade shows just around the corner, it's more of an independent show actually, but they've actually set up, for the first time I've ever seen it, I don't know if Patsy might have seen it elsewhere, but a whole section within the trade show that for brands with sustainable credentials. Obviously I've put a link in there with quite a few of those that you know, that you can go through and have a look. One in particular I would give a shout out to is Komodo, in part because obviously he spoke on the panel we did around this topic. I think you were on that panel if I remember rightly, Patsy, but he actually curated the whole section for the event organizers. So I definitely have a look at that link. There's loads of other brands I'd love to shout out. I'd have to speak to my colleague to get a list of names. We do showcase a lot of sustainable brands on our feed, so if anyone wants, you know,
fantastic.
Also, if anyone wants to shout out as well, give us a note of any interesting brands. We'd be more than happy to showcase them.
Amazing. We will share your details on the follow-up email so people can follow you online and, as say, also get that bit of a shout out to some great brands. Patsy, any that you look at and are particularly impressed by?
I think, yeah, it's quite difficult, isn't it? Because as we've been speaking today, you don't know whether they're implementing it across the whole business holistically. But I think what I'd be impressed with is any company that's trying to sort of reimagine the business model, that's not looking at just selling more items. Because even if you have, you know, the most sustainable fabric production process, are you actually displacing other consumption of fashion, or are you just adding to the volume of fashion that we're currently purchasing? And, you know, how do then consumers engage with the product once they've bought it? So do they wear it once and then sits in the back of the wardrobe, or are they then, you know, using it, wearing it, having it repaired? So, you know, a company such as Hicks Denim in South Wales, and the whole ethos, isn't it, is about the longevity of the product. So it's made in a very sustainable way. It's meant to be durable, last for a long time. You can send it to get repaired and so on. So they have that kind of holistic view about, we're not just going to make something and push it out onto the market, but we have this whole service around it that we will help you look after it and help you get the most out of it. And also any businesses, which can't think of any, that are looking at kind of degrowth, so not looking at growth targets and aiming to sell more product year on year on year, because how are we ever going to, you know, reach our climate targets if we're just producing more stuff all the time? But I think that's a really kind of difficult challenge, isn't it? Because there's so many of the factors at play, people's jobs and so on. So
yeah, it's that balance.
We don't really see many examples of
economic growth and job security against, like, you just need to stop consuming so much stuff. Alison, anyone who's kind of particularly inspired you in the industry?
For me, it's Patagonia. They're on a scale, so that also is interesting to look at how you reach scale. But I think they've built lots of things into their business. And are we on the ground as well helping? Are we just, I think that's been some of this conversation, are we just moving the problem? Are we saying, don't trust you to deal with it, we're going to do it here? Or are we saying, I don't like how you're currently doing with it, can I sit and help you do it differently if it's farm cotton or whatever? And then they've built in things that they got my approval when they started looking at how do we actually have a proper paternity and maternity policy, because we're losing a lot of our staff who want to have children. And I was like, there you go. Okay, if you're willing to look that far through your system, that makes me smile and think, how do we follow that? How do we look at what you do and learn from it? Because you have reached a massive scale.
Yeah, absolutely, and definitely one of the key brands there that people will pull on as being more sustainable. And I say because they've got that scale, they've been able to take some bolder moves than other organisations might have been able to. Brilliant. So we're going to open up to Q&A now. If you pop any questions in the chat, whilst you're thinking of those and popping them in, I'm just going to come to you, Nicola, just to explain a little bit about the projects that you're involved in.
Thanks, Iona. You know, this has been really interesting. Thank you so much. It's great to hear Alison's story. Patsy, I follow you on social media. Dale, we met a number of years ago through Marty and Alexander. So it's good to see connections coming together. So yeah, I entered this kind of field of fashion sustainability a number of years ago. It was through a health issue. I'd had breast cancer and I wanted to raise money for charity, and my idea was starting to look at what do people do with the increase in the rise of kind of social media, etc., and people wearing things once and then not wanting to be seen in it again. So we started asking a few celebrities to just donate some items from their wardrobe, because we thought that would raise some awareness and raise money. But then I was overwhelmed by the amount of people who were just new in my network, and also people who's heard my story, who were approaching me saying, I've got things in my wardrobe that, you know, some of them have got price tags on. I've not worn them. I've worn once. And I don't want to really give them to a charity shop because I feel there's a lot of value in it, and I might resell it myself one day, but never get round to it. And I started to learn very quickly by the amount of people who contacted me with the same kind of message and the same story, and just didn't know what to do because they didn't have the time themselves to resell. They were popping these items back in the wardrobes. So we started taking items from people and selling them on to raise money for charity initially. Then started to we were approached by people who were saying, well, actually, I'd like a bit of money back, please, because I can't really just justify, you know, giving it all to charity, and I do need something back. And that's fine. I think that's okay. And that's when we started working like with Martine and other stylists who were working with clients, clearing that items from the wardrobes and wanting a way of kind of moving those items on, but keep them in use longer. And actually, just because it's unwanted by one person, it's very much wanted by another person. So that was kind of our journey, and we moved on to then working with retailers. I was very interested in what retailers do with unsold stock initially, and that opened up a whole kind of that was just a thing in itself, really. And it was just before the pandemic, and we were kind of talking to a lot of retailers, chief execs of major high street retailers. And I think the common feedback was they wanted to do things more responsibly and more sustainably, but were kind of so consumed in the day-to-day running of the business that actually didn't really know what to do. So they were donating some of their stock to charity. They were giving some of it to jobbers. They were, you know, some of it was going to landfill, but almost if we had a partner that could do all of those things for us, that we could build a relationship with, a trusted relationship, you know, that would be fantastic. And it was interesting to hear your insight, Patsy, around the recycling companies. So we went out and found a textile recycling partner that could help us deliver some of those things. We've now got 2 textile recycling partners, and so we're working with retailers now, offering them almost like a one-stop shop service. So I had a meeting yesterday with the chief exec of quite a well-known Manchester-based, not one of the fast fashion companies, but another well-known online retailer for women. And, you know, they were saying, we know we need to do something, but we almost don't know where to start. It's like, how do you find the best solutions? How do you dedicate the time to do that? And actually, you know, we have got stock that we need to move on more responsibly, but what's the best way of doing that? And is it through, you know, do we donate some of it to charity? If we then use a textile recycling company, how do we know what markets that's going into, etc.? How do we know that's protecting our brand as well? But where we've got to is, so where I'm able to have conversations with retailers and say, we can do all of those things for you, and often in a bespoke way. We're also working with a number of retailers at the minute to launch a resale service for their customers. So as much as what retailers are doing in-house, how do they support their customers to think and act more responsibly? So although we've got general public coming to us saying, you know, we want to use your resale service, I've got, you know, 20 unwanted items in my wardrobe, whatever, I'd like to get some money back for 10, and, you know, for the resale of the other 10, the money can go to charity. We're now working with retailers to say, you know, let's have a partnership whereby you promote and encourage your customers to think about resale of their unwanted fashion items. So you've got a following as a retailer, you've got a following, you've got customers who already buy into your brand. A way that you can act more responsibly is by saying to your customers, we want to now help you to act more responsibly. We're putting in place a service through this partnership Worn by Us, whereby you can now have a route to resell your unwanted items and keep, you know, our aim is about keeping them in use longer, which I think is something you said, Patsy, earlier. You know, things are not always at the end of the lifespan when they become unwanted by a certain individual. So we've created quite a number of partnerships that can almost kind of address all of those things, either with individual consumers or through retailers. And the conversation often comes up about, well, what about the real end of life, you know, products, and what happens to them? And through the partnerships we've developed, we've got 2 social enterprise partners who deliver upcycling projects for people in local communities around kind of getting them back into employment, etc. But also through the major textile recyclers, being able to deliver ways in which those products can be kind of reused in different materials. So, you know, maybe shredded for insulation fillings and different things. So I found this really, really interesting. I'm looking at getting the word out there more about what we do, but developing partnerships. I believe everything's about people and relationships. We want to speak to more retailers, whether they're large or small. We just want to get the message out and you know, play our part. We know it's a small part and we know that, you know, we're not going to change the world on our own, but I think it's about, what I've learned is we're not going to change this overnight. It's about taking some small steps and getting more people involved and more people aware, and we can start to, you know, make some kind of progress and play a part in that.
Amazing, and I think you are playing a very important part there, and it's been really interesting to me, having met you for the first time probably maybe 4 or 5 years ago even, as kind of this was just kind of in its infancy, the projects that you were talking about, to see how many different areas that have picked up, and I think really echoes a lot of what Alison was saying earlier as well, that kind of once you start looking at one bit, you then think about something else and think about something else and think about something else, and it's been brilliant that, you know, as challenging as those extra bits have been, it's been like, right, there's an opportunity here, we can bring it in, we can find a partner, we can work with people. So thank you so much for sharing that. And if you've not already, do drop the link in to Worn by Us and projects that you're in, because I'm sure people will be interested, and we'll send it out afterwards as well. So just seen a couple of questions pop up in the chat, so just going to have a quick look there. So people often want to make the most sustainable choices but aren't aware of how unsustainable it is. How do you think the best way is to ensure the sustainable fashion system is developed? So we've got this kind of uncertainty, and I think that lack of a definition is something that we've spoken about before. If we want to develop that sustainable fashion industry, what does it need?
I think there is quite a bit being taught in schools nowadays. So although we've sort of lost a lot of textiles as a subject matter in schools over the years, I do think that schools are teaching quite a lot around sustainability, like even in Greater Manchester, we've got over 1,000 eco schools here. So I think it is on the curriculum. But you're right that it needs to be something that's taught at a young age, and then it's kind of normalised, isn't it? So we've done quite a lot of public engagement events at museums where we do sort of showcase sewing and upcycling and so on. And, you know, we think there's a stigma about, you know, boys don't want to be doing textiles and sewing, and, you know, we're too rich to be darning socks and so on. But it's quite interesting that people actually do kind of gravitate towards that. It's kind of the activity of sitting and doing something quite with your hands rather than being on a screen, and just like having some quiet time maybe with family members and so on. And they absolutely love, you know, sewing, doing a bit of embroidery, sewing buttons on, and it's quite you know, amazing to meet an adult that's never sewn a button on in their life, and you show them how to do it, and they're quite proud of themselves, isn't it? But I think we do need to be able to do some of that basic stuff ourselves, because it's so expensive to have it done professionally. And you know, you even hear anecdotal reports of people taking stuff back because the buttons fell off, you know, and it's just such a waste of a garment, isn't it, where you could just probably fix that yourself. Or, you know, children trying to sellotape a button on, it's not how it goes on, is it? But some basic skills around that, as well as kind of basic home maintenance, I think would be useful, so that we are a bit more self-sufficient. We've been able to extend the useful life of clothing, but also, you know, other common household goods. And the younger you start, the better it is, because then it's just kind of normal habit, isn't it, rather than trying to learn it as an adult.
Absolutely, so a real lost skill there, that if you kind of look at the generation before, it was like, you know, this was just absolutely normal, this was stuff that everyone could do, and then you kind of, you know, have our generation and generation coming up underneath, so it's like that's just not normal. Like, you take it back if it's broken, it's cheaper to buy new than it is to get it repaired, and we're in this kind of really weird situation where it's like, well, I could take it to a tailor and have this done and mended, or I could just buy something that was brand new, and that would actually be cheaper and quicker and more convenient. It's a very different mindset shift. And then the people are going, well, actually, like, I'd love to be able to make my own clothes, I'd love to be able to do this, but I don't know where to start, I've not got that knowledge. So yeah, really important there. One of the other questions that popped up in the chat was around if somebody's looking at developing more of their own kind of sustainable brand, where can they go to get more support and advice? And I feel like this has got Dale written all over it as signposting to where there's support for people wanting to develop skills and get into the industry.
I fear you were going to ask me. So I was just reading that myself. I mean, there are some good market resource things, but obviously they're quite expensive for startup businesses. I don't want to shamelessly plug us, but we do provide a lot of events and content around business development. So definitely follow us. I think also I would definitely get out to the shows and see what's going on there, because you can see who's doing what, and, you know, which brands do not, get an idea. It's a difficult one to answer that, really, because often a lot of people that start brands in this space are either starting it to fill a need that they're not getting already, which I think I see Alison nodding a bit down there. So it's a bit of a tricky one, really, to answer that. But I'd certainly sign up to us. Look at things like the business of fashion as well. There's some good insights in there. Drapers would be another one. Common Objective, someone's put in there. Yes, yeah, that's another good one as well. Just get involved as many things as you can from a publishing point of view, and just read. But like I say, most people we come across are just fixing needs that they've identified issues themselves as consumers, which is a lot of these startup brands happen like, and then either it works or it doesn't work, or it sort of half works, and then they adapt and change. And I don't know if that's an answer that's of any value. I hope it is. Yeah.
Alison, as someone who's been in that kind of and still are in that kind of startup phase and getting to grips with the industry and the marketing, are there any tips there that you're like, if someone had told me this day one, it would have been really valuable, or kind of anything that you'd want to signpost that's been helpful?
I think one, from what Dale was saying, is most people start when they see a problem, and that starting, especially a brand, is very hard work. And so knowing that you really love what you're about to do, because you're about to have to justify it to everyone in your life 12 times over. So knowing that you've got a, this is why I promise I'm willing to get up at 3 a.m. to sort my problem out. In terms of resources, like Mintel, massive market research firm, you can often get quite a lot of their stuff for free. Scott Scotland is Business Gateway. England have their own equivalent of like a business service from the government. They often have access. If you facilitate, how else public libraries often do on the internet. But the other way to do it is survey everyone, send out an anonymous survey, put it on Facebook, ask everyone to share it, get in the exact data that you need, has often been our best way to get the information that we want. And then if it's fashion, ask every brand that you can talk to, every small brand, how have you solved this problem? Where are you struggling? What are you seeing? Because the things that have made us the biggest jumps have been when someone's been able to say, here's what we learned, because they've done all the research for you. And so finding those people and trying to borrow their knowledge, I think is quite useful.
Fantastic. And I think what we sometimes see with sustainability more than in other areas is how open people are to sharing that there's kind of that acceptance. And it's something that Nicola just touched on there, is being like, we can't just solve this overnight and we can't solve it on our own. Like it's an everybody issue, and actually that openness of actually sharing and saying like, this is what we did, this is a struggle that we had. People want other people to know that, because we want everybody else to be more sustainable as well. Fab. So I'm just going to ask all the panellists one final question before we finish off for the day. And what I'd like to know, if there was one thing that you could just kind of wave a magic wand and be like, this is what I would fix around the fashion industry to make it more sustainable, what would that one thing be? And I'm going to come to you first, Patsy, if you've thought of the one thing that you'd like to change.
I think it would be really good to see some viable alternative business models to just selling more product to get more profit. I think that's something that we need to work on, because there are platforms, but I feel that they're still quite niche and they don't really compete on a mass scale with just buying new stuff, because it's just so convenient, so cheap often, isn't it? And there's so much choice. But if you did want to engage with extending lifetimes of clothing, or trialing different business models based on sort of sharing access and so on, I think, yeah, we need to work on that. So I'd like to see more development in that area, which I think is really interesting.
Models. I like it. Alison, what would you change?
The value action gap, the amount of people who want to go sustainable versus the amount who are actually purchasing from the brands, supporting the brands, sharing their stuff on social media, starting those conversations. I'd like to shrink that overnight. That would make
fantastic. So actually that we say we want to be more sustainable, let's actually go and make those choices. Great. And then Dale, one thing for you that you'd change?
Patsy's just ruined it for me, because that was my answer. Should have come to me first.
We'll pretend we didn't do it. Dale, come to you first. What's yours?
Oh, well, okay.
We'll edit it out.
Business models. For me, I'm not specifically against fast fashion, but I would like to see some sort of recycling element built into that. So, if you're producing products so quickly, it needs not to be built out of certain fabrics, and it needs to be a circular thing where it's getting recycled and produced again. So I don't want to sort of like necessarily fast fashion's evil or something. I'd also like to see a more on the business model tip. So this is probably two things, but in the more luxury end of the market, I'd like to see more mend and repair. I think that's definitely something we've lost as a society. Certainly of my generation, I remember my grandparents, everything was mend and repair, and that's across everything, not just clothing. Everything was mend and repaired. Funny enough, I just gave something for my dad to repair this weekend. He goes, "Oh, you can buy that only for a few quid." I was like, "Oh, right, okay." But I just wanted to get it repaired, sort of thing. And I'm going to go back to the shop and buy this thing. It was a sieve, it was, but anyway, that's another story. But I'd like to see more recycling built into the business model at more value end, and I'd like to see more sort of like stores and brands taking stuff in. I believe Patagonia do this already, but fixing stuff and repairing all that sort of stuff, that's what I'd like to see. So I totally agree with Patsy, just a shift in the business model, and I predict it will happen. That I definitely think that will happen.
I think that there is that move towards it. Yeah, Patagonia, as you say, they do it at any time for their own brands, but then they also have open days where you can take in anything and have it repaired, which is huge. And particularly if you're buying kind of those more expensive items that you might be concerned about purchasing, being like, well, what happens if I rip it, or this happens? Like, well, we'll just fix it and it'll be fine. Is a much easier decision then to make as a consumer. But yeah, absolutely, that repair is something that's being looked at in a few sectors. There's regulations coming in soon, particularly around kind of white goods and that right to repair, that actually like, they have to be easy to fix to be able to get to the bits that are likely to break, and for those parts to be available for a certain length of time after the goods are sold. Because as much as, you know, throwing away a dress because it's got a rip in it is one thing, throwing away your entire washing machine because some tiny little bit in the middle of it that you can't get to is broken, obviously a huge impact there per item. But when you look at the scale of the amount of products that we buy in the fashion industry compared to those white goods, it makes sense that we also put a lot of effort into that as well. Well, thank you so much to all of you for joining us this morning. I can see in the chats people are finding it very useful and interesting. We will bob through links to the speakers' LinkedIns and socials, so please do follow them, engage with them afterwards. I think there's some really interesting work going on in the sector, and it'll be fascinated to see where it goes next. As I mentioned at the beginning, our next sustainability webinar is on the 17th of March. We're going to be looking much more at the tech side of things, looking at things around kind of green coding, green servers. Everything that we do at the moment seems to have a digital footprint. So looking at that, and obviously e-commerce will come into play there as well. Do follow Elevate on our socials, see what we're up to, join the newsletter, and hopefully we've got some more events that will be of interest to you as well. So finally, just once again, thanks to all the panellists for your time this morning. I found it hugely useful, and we will be sharing this recording out for anybody who missed it.